You're tuned in to Nabantu Connect, connecting you to insights from Africa's leading minds.
I'm thrilled to be sitting down with Basani Maluleke, an inspiring woman and leader who has made incredible strides in the corporate world, and someone I'm privileged to have known for many years. In this conversation, I chat to Basani about her journey from her early influences to navigating leadership in a traditionally male-dominated field. So enjoy and lean into the conversation. Okay, hey, hi Basani.
Hi.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat to us. I mean, I know you're not even in Joburg and living somewhere else, but yeah.
Thank you for the invitation. As I was saying, I will take any opportunity to be in Joburg, so it's an absolute pleasure to be with you.
Oh, no, really excited to actually get your full story. I mean, I know you and I have engaged many a times and we've chatted, but I think it's lovely for people to get a sense of actually, what's your journey been like? And I know many people have heard like sprinkles here and there about this and that, but just to get to know you and to learn from you, because I know you've got so much to share. Every time we hang out, I always learn something. So really lovely to chat with you.
Thanks for that vote of confidence.
Okay. All right. So I think a good place to start often is really what shapes you, right? And often what shapes us are like our formative years, kind of, the families we grew up in, how, we started in life. And, often, in our world, and coaching OD, we talk about the first 7 years of one's life being like the most sort of formative years. So I'd like to hear from you, like, how was your early childhood and kind of what shaped the Basani we know now?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I haven't thought about that in a while. But the first 8 years of my life was spent in Soshanguve, which is just north of Pretoria. So that's where our family home was. So my grandparents were there, all my father's siblings were there. So I got to grow up in this township where, I would walk for 10 minutes and it would be my aunt's house. Then it would be my grandmother's house. So it felt it was home in so many ways. And of course, it being a township, and back then, right, like in the 80s, everybody knew everybody else. Everybody's parents were allowed to discipline you. We could play in the streets. So it really felt like that idea of it takes a village to raise a kid. Everybody was involved in everybody else's business. And at the time, it was a very welcome thing. I'm not so sure that that's the case today.
Yeah.
But of course, it was also during apartheid, right? So the 80s were not exactly an easy time. And I think what it taught me was a lot of discipline, right? So my parents were very clear about curfews. You had to have even plans around, so I went to school when I was 4 years old. So I was quite small when I went to school, and there was clarity that, listen, if is a police raid, this is what you do, right? So everything was about keeping us safe, keeping us together, me and my siblings. I had an older sister who was also at school in the neighboring school to me. So it was always about, she had to run from her school, grab me, and then we'd run to my aunt's house. So it was a time of great confusion for me as a young kid. Definitely a sense of not feeling comfortable in the sense that you kind of knew there was something very wrong about this business of being black.
Yeah.
Like you kind of understood that quite early on. It just kept being reinforced over and over and over.
Yeah.
And I think even at that age, it's very hard to comprehend the sources of this and what it means. All you can think of is that clearly I've done something wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Clearly me, myself, my parents, grandparents, this whole community of black people has just gotten something horribly wrong, and that's why we kind of at the bottom of the totem pole.
Yeah.
But we survived it, right? So when I was 8, I got to go to St. Andrews, which was a whole other traumatic experience. But I suppose the point is, in my formative years, it was really about understanding community, right? Being a part of a community during good times and bad. Understanding family. So my parents gave me family in so many different ways. It was family and parents, grandparents, cousins, and so on, but also adopted family. We had so many family friends.
Yeah.
And my parents introduced all sorts of leading lights of society into our home, who were there all the time discussing these very heady subjects around the struggle and how do we gain democracy? How do we free ourselves from the yoke of apartheid? How do we get flowers to bloom in a difficult environment? So these are the conversations that were in our home, and I think they formed a very big part of who I am today.
Sure, that's amazing. And when you think about kind of those formative years, having these conversations, being part of these conversations, and I mean, I've had these conversations with different, people, and not everybody had the opportunity to have those conversations in a family environment and structure. Some people, it was just more about survival and, kind of getting through it, or, and some people, it's more about, that aspect of, parents included me in the conversation, kind of helped me share. Just if you think about some of the seminal moments or some of the seminal conversations in that phase of your life that you say, okay, are long-lasting and have kind of stayed with you.
Yeah.
What are those kind of...
It's funny. One of the most vivid memories of my life was when we were still living in Soshanguve. And so, I'm not sure how often it would happen. Memory is a very unreliable thing. But it was after a very big police raid on a Saturday. So you would know it was coming. So all the houses along the main road, so we were on a main road, you had to make sure that all the windows were closed because tear gas was a thing. But also you had to have, big buckets of water outside your home so that people who were protesting and doing could have somewhere to go to clean out their eyes. I just remember that so vividly, that if you didn't do that, it was letting down the community and there would be consequences, right? Which was never a pretty thing. So that would happen, but then inevitably, people's children would be arrested, kids would disappear, people would be murdered, right? And it was after a night like that, or a day like that, where I knew that in the morning there would be this queue of people coming to see my father to ask for legal assistance because, their kids had been in jail or had been arrested or whatever it was, right? So my father had a law firm, so he and his friends or his law partners would be at the house from early in the morning, and they would just start seeing all these families and start drafting papers, or I don't know what they were doing, but like these people would be coming in and having these conversations with them. And then inevitably the queue would eventually die down, and then late into the night, well into the night, my father would be sitting in the sitting room with his partners and a whole bunch of other people from the community, and they'd be all under this cloud of cigarette smoke, because smoking then was a thing. And I remember I would sit there and just listen to them talk about the dream of the country that they wanted to build, the dream of what it would be like when this time in our history was over, and the work that needed to be done to get us there. A lot of conversations about the Black consciousness movement, right? And this idea about who could be as Black people if we could have that pride back that had been so taken away from us because of apartheid. And those stories and those narratives and the commitment that these men had, because they were all men, to figuring out how to build a better society. I mean, for me, that was just so meaningful.
Man. Look, I mean, we've chatted many a times, but as you're talking, I don't think we've had this conversation of kind of like the parallels, right? You're describing a childhood with, a father who was a lawyer and providing these legal services and having different people come and looking for advice in the country, whereas for me it was the opposite, right? In exile, the comrades coming, father who's a lawyer, kind of coming into the space and settling and all of that. But there's something about what I'm hearing in the commonality and how I've kind of, even other conversations I've had, something about the father figure, particularly for, women, and how, kind of we navigate through life and succeed or not or whatever it is. But there's something there about the figure, father figure, and I'm seeing that in that commonality as well. Is there something to be said about that when you think about the influence?
So undoubtedly my father was my favorite parent. And I think often when I talk to a lot of my female friends, they also had father figures who were very present. They were very deeply and sincerely loved, and my father loved us so sincerely. It was really quite something. And when he passed, it was, I feared that I would just break apart and never find my way back to myself again. So we were very loved, we were very well taken care of. He was extremely supportive. I mean, you asked earlier about formative conversations. I remember this other conversation I had with him. I must have been in my teens. And I'd kind of grown up as the ugly duckling in the family. I was always too dark. My hair was a little bit just not working. I was really not the most, and I really wasn't that pretty, right, if I look at the pictures. And so at the time, we would do, we'd relax our hair and do all the things that women do to try and make themselves pretty. And at some point, he came up to me and he said, "You must stop doing these things. You're beautiful as you are. I love you as you are." And he kept, this was an ongoing conversation. Right? Every time I'd come back home and have done something ridiculous to myself, he'd be like, "Look, there really is no need for this. You're enough. Stop. You're enough. Really stop." Right? And I think having a man who was held in such high esteem by society, my father was, he was very admired. He played a huge role in the societies and the communities that he moved around in. And I think having him affirm me as a woman, as a girl, as a person, made a huge difference. And I think fathers matter. I think they matter to boy children too, but I have a feeling they especially matter to girl children.
Yeah, I'm finding that there's something about the self-confidence that is built in a girl child that originates from a father's love. And there seems to be that kind of sort of parallel that says, I'm okay in the world, I'm worthy in the world, and, I'm okay.
If my daddy says I'm good, it must be true.
I mean, it is true. And okay, so fast forward your life, and we know you from being in financial services and all of that. But I mean, you're a lawyer. How does it happen that you start a career in law? What led to that? I mean, I remember my dad trying to get me to become a lawyer.
Did he succeed?
I did study law, but it never happened. Something there. So with this background in law and then kind of this career that then plays out in the world of financial services and
So when I finished matric, I had done particularly well in accounting, and so I was offered a bursary by KPMG. But I wanted to study law because I wanted to be like my father. Surprise. And I said to him, "Look, I really want to study law." And he said, "No, that's not going to happen. Law is a jealous mistress. You will work all day, every day, and never make any money. So what you're going to do is you're going to study commerce." We argued, but I was like, he was my father, right? What the man says is what's going to happen. So he then literally filled out the application forms for me to UCT to do a BCom. And so I did my BCom accounts, and I just hated auditing. So I did auditing during my vacations, and I was just like, look, I'm auditing a BMW. I love cars, right? At that time, I really loved cars. And I thought to myself, I'm auditing a company that produces a good that I love, and I hate it. This can't be the job for me. So then he and I got into an agreement that as long as I finish my accounting degree, I can study law. So of course I finished it as quickly as I possibly could. And then I did law. And studying law was amazing for me. I studied law at a time when the Constitutional Court had just started passing some of its first judgments. So the Con Court was still new at the time. This would have been the late 90s. So they were passing judgments about homosexuality and about socioeconomic rights, like the right to access to healthcare. So, and of course, the death penalty cases. All this stuff that was troubling society, that was keeping societies apart, that was causing polarization, and they were trying to create a shared vision of the kind of country we should want to live in. It was beautiful. I was so happy. And then I started practicing law, and I realized that practicing commercial law is not the same thing as kind of, reading dazzling cases coming out of the Con Court about the kind of society we want to be. So I did law. I qualified as an attorney, which my father wanted, because he was like, become admitted as an attorney, and he admitted me. So my father was an acting judge at the time.
Yes, that's beautiful.
It was very special.
Sure.
I thought it was very embarrassing at the time. But now I realize.
But now it's like, my gosh, one
Very
generation to another.
Right?
Wow, stunning.
He was so excited. And so after that, I said to him, look, I'm done with this. So I went to R&B and started my career as a banker.
Sure. And from commercial, and I mean, I know some of your sort of passions very much in the human rights, gender rights, all of that space.
Yeah.
What then sort of kind of limited you from saying, okay, I'm in attorney in the space, let me go that direction, which talks to sort of my passions and some of the things I'm interested in, life, when I look at the constitutional judgments and, all of that stuff. And then say, you know what, actually, I'm going to go the R&B route or that direction.
I'm trying to remember exactly what was happening in my mind then.
Yeah.
So I think a couple of, maybe two big things. One, I couldn't figure out how I was going to do that. I couldn't figure out how I was going to become a human rights lawyer who was going to focus on these very big social issues.
Yes.
And at the same time, I had realized when I was working as a lawyer that I actually just missed finance. I missed accounting. I missed doing things with that side of my brain. And so around that time, I started searching for a job, and I got this job spec in corporate finance, which seemed to have, a whole lot of finance stuff.
Yeah.
And then the other half of it was a whole lot of legal stuff. And I was like, look, this is a match made in heaven. I mean, this is totally the job spec for me.
Yeah.
And then the rest was just history. I loved it. I got to R&B. I didn't know anything about finance, anything about corporate finance. So the learning curve was extremely steep.
Yeah.
I had so much support from so many of the people there, some of whom I'm still very close to because they played a really incredible big role in my life and helping me to overcome obstacles and think differently and build a career in finance.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with the world of finance, and I just never looked back.
Yeah. And I love that you talk to, people, who kind of whether stepped in or supported, and and a big part of, I guess, a lot of what we're going to be talking about is more about leadership and leading and you being a leader in that space. But there's something about people opening doors for us, people sort of mentoring us and holding our hand at times, pushing us, at times. Kind of, what's been the role of sort of mentorship and, that guidance in your life? And are there any key moments that you think about when you think about people who have, put out those opportunities?
There are so many. I'm trying to come up with the ones that have been truly meaningful. Maybe the first for me is that when I was learning how to do evaluations at R&B, and I mean, this was just a different language altogether, right? Never mind a different discipline. And I was really just struggling with this idea of how do I actually do this? How do I forecast appropriately? How do I build a discounted cash flow model? And there was this man at R&B. And I remember one night he stayed up with me until 3 a.m. building a model. And then I had to come back the following morning at 6 o'clock to finish the presentation so we could present around 8 a.m. And I think just that level of just commitment to this woman he just didn't know really. Like there was no good reason for him to have cared. But he did. And then that was the first one. And then after that, the same still at R&B. I remember my sister, my older sister, who's now the Auditor General. But I can't remember what I was talking to her about. But it must have been something along the lines of, I really want to make the best of this job, but I'm struggling to figure out a way to do it. And she said to me, talk to the head of corporate finance and tell him what you just told me. Tell him you want to be good at this thing, you are passionate about this thing, and you need him to mentor you.
Sure.
So I took notes and off I went, barged into his office, and I was like, this is what I want. I want you to mentor me. He was like, absolutely. So every Friday afternoon, he would be like, okay, show me exactly what you've done the whole week, right? Sure. And then he'd be like, getting exposure to this, and this, and he would fix it. And that's what we did for months and months and months until he left R&B, and which is very heartbreaking for me. But it just he opened the doors, right? He gave me access to doing deals that other people could only have dreamed of doing. I got exposure to companies, to CEOs that, would have been a world away otherwise.
Yeah.
I made a lot of mistakes and fell over and had to get back up many times. But at R&B, there were more than a few people who were like, okay, we think we see something in this one that might be worth watering.
Yes.
Let's give this plant some water and see if it grows into a tree.
Sure.
So I was very lucky.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm just listening to kind of what you're talking about, and my mind is straying to often what I hear about leadership, right? So I'm hearing, he helped me, and he da-da-da, and he and not a lot of she da-da-da, and she, and there's such a huge misconception, I think misconception often, about women and women in leadership, and black women in leadership, in particular, like, oh gosh, you get a black woman leader, oh Lord, it's the worst, I don't know, forget it. Is there something there about kind of men and women leaders that you've experienced, and you are a women leader, and how that's influenced how you've shown up, but just some of that chatter that that kind of people talk about, and that's like, oh no, women, oh no, catty, oh, da, 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 da. No, men, as leaders, they'll develop you, and that always gets me. But I'm wondering if there's something there, that there's a distinction for you, or
it's a very complex thing that you raise. and maybe for me, it even starts as far back as with my mom. Right? And my mom played a very subservient role to my dad. And I struggled with that over a long period of time, especially because my father was such a big personality. Right? And as a result, I aspired to become more like him. But, as I look back now and I spend time with my mom, she's got very severe dementia. And as I spend time with her now, and I think through the incredibly important role that she played in keeping our family together, the things about my family that I love now and enjoy now are because of everything that she built.
Sure.
Like, she was there, right? My father couldn't be there, right? He was busy trying to stay alive and keep us alive. So it was, it is just what it was. And I think I'm very guilty of totally underplaying the role that women play in my life and the lives of others around us, because I think I've internalized this idea that the contribution of women is not as important as that of men. And I think I spent a lot of, particularly my kind of 20s, maybe even early 30s, aspiring to becoming more like a man rather than tapping into the strengths of what it means to be a woman.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to understand that. And so when I look back at my career, my early banking career, it is also true that the people who could have the influence over my career were all men. Even if I look at my articles, when I first started working, again, the only people I worked with then were men. I think there was one other woman, but the partner responsible for me was a man. So I think it was just a question of the concentration of men. When I look at my career now, undoubtedly that concentration has become less concentrated with just men. I think there's definitely a lot more women. I think it's also the women who have made it to this level of seniority. We've shared experiences of the trauma that one has to go through to get to this level of seniority. And I think that shared experience of just how hard it is and how hard it continues to be, it's something that you can really only share with other women, right? Because it's hard for men to really understand it. And to have that sisterhood has been just such an incredible support for me at this point in my life, and I sincerely I tap into it a lot, and I'm really grateful for it. And it's also made me much more mindful about saying, how do I support the women around me a lot better? Because I think now I have the mental space to do it as well. I think maybe earlier on in my career, I was just trying to survive. And so I'm much more intentional about it now. And I can only see good things happening around the sisterhood.
And I mean, just what you're talking about around, sometimes it is just about survival, right? Particularly in these spaces where, it is masculinity that's dominant and, all of that. And the, people sometimes who have the access to open the doors.
All right.
How the men.
The gatekeepers.
Yeah, they're the gatekeepers.
Absolutely.
At the time, and someone said to me, it's because, often it's because they don't feel any threat. You're not threatening.
I think that's also true.
in any way. So, so it becomes an easier thing. I was reflecting and saying, if I think about my early career, white men, actually a lot of, where I'm at is white men, but I'm like, well, that's because they're the ones who have the access.
Totally.
And when they look at you, it's not like, oh, I'm threatened.
Yeah.
And this one is coming after my space. Whereas when we, in terms of giving women leaders grace, and in particular black women leaders grace, is the struggle it takes to get there and the struggle it takes to stay there, and the, the battle around that. And I mean, if we talk about climbing the corporate ladder, you are one of the first.
This is true.
Kind of breaking through the glass ceiling. Chat to us a little bit about just kind of how that was, or how that is, that breaking through that ceiling and what it's like when you're there. And all the challenges that come with it. I can imagine it's not so easy.
No, it certainly isn't. I think you try to balance so many different things, right? So again, I suppose that my breakthrough moment arose because two white men were like, this one. We should give her this opportunity, right? We are holding the keys to this gate.
Sure.
Let's help her to open it. So I had support in getting up there. So there's that. And then I think
it's two white men.
It was.
Yeah.
And I think when you get up there, because you're the first, right, you're dealing with a whole lot of insecurities from all sorts of people, from a lot of people around you who don't quite know what to do with you. Right?
Yeah.
A lot of people have never had a female boss, never mind a female black boss, right? So that's complicated. I'd never been anybody's boss at that level.
Yeah.
So I was trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I had some really good coaches.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And then, exactly. And so that definitely helped. I think learning that I needed to get help and help to understand what this moment meant. Right, and how I needed to show up to be successful in that role. So I managed to get quite a bit of help in trying to do that. And I think the other side of it that I didn't anticipate it was the level of expectation from other women, from other marginalized groups, I'll call them that, because it's not just women, it's not just black people, it's also white men who feel that the opportunities aren't there for them, right? They start to see you as the person who's going to shine the path, who's going to open the doors.
Yeah.
And so the amount of just pressure that creates, right? This kind of constant expectation that you will make these things possible.
Yeah.
That you will understand when nobody else has understood.
Yeah.
So that I didn't expect, and it was a lot. It was a lot to manage. But at the same time, there were also these amazing things that would happen. I'd be at Woolies and somebody would walk up to me and be like, I just want to say thank you. Just your existence and the fact that you're doing this thing means the world to me, because I now believe I can do it too. So it's this whole kind of social construct, this whole societal shift that happens around you, which is beautiful in so many ways. And in so many other ways, it's just this reminder of what it means to be a first, that you are carrying the dreams of so many and you best not mess it up.
My gosh.
And then of course I messed it up. So,
No, I will not accept that.
It wasn't a fairy tale.
Yes.
That I think a lot of us are over for.
Yep.
And I think that it was hard for me, obviously, but I think also hard for so many other people who had all these hopes and all these dreams that were lodged in this idea of, if she can do it, then it's possible. Suddenly it raised the question that no, but maybe it isn't, and I felt responsible for that for a long time.
Gosh.
But I think I've kind of mostly moved past that, and I've realized that there are so many different ways to be a role model.
Yeah.
And I've learned to have a lot more grace for myself as well, around just how hard it actually is, all the blind spots that are there, the level of inertia there is. Society doesn't love change, right?
Yeah.
Society really doesn't like change. And it does mean, now I understand the forces at play to keep the status quo what it is.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot in that, right? Because I think there's the one aspect around, I think you say status quo, right? In terms of the forces that, at play that actually resist, and are resisting, and sometimes present as, we want you in that space, or we want you to be great and to achieve, or we are supporters. When actually in the background, when you actually then step into who you are and what you're there to do, and all of that. Whoa, no, right, gone too far. Right, no, our way, no, our interests.
It's this question of, I thought you understood the rules.
Yeah, I mean,
this thing that you're now doing, we don't love so much.
Yeah.
So it is tough, and I think it's tough for everybody. All of us are raised to believe a certain set of things. And all of us see threats to what we want to achieve, because we all have our own dreams around what we want to achieve. And the moment you see something evolve that could threaten that dream that you have, right? No matter how tangentially, no matter how vaguely this thing might actually impact your world, right? Maybe put it in better English. No matter how far away that threat might actually be, the fact that it's there,
absolutely,
I think forces people to do unfortunate things.
Sure. I'm going to just stick just a little bit on this, and then we'll move a little bit. But I mean, I know there's a lot of talk in our society about Black women who get, sort of promoted and, elevated, rightfully so, because of their skills and all of that, into the, highest levels of leadership. And that there seems to be a pattern in our society that says, actually, the ship that we're going to put you on is going to be a ship that was sinking and that we expect to sink.
Totally.
And I mean, if I think about, the organization where, you kind of went to the top, it was a sinking ship in many ways. And then it's like, oh my gosh, in 2 years, this thing is not so sinking anymore.
I think in fairness, I think to the outside world, I think some people have written off that bank. But fortunately, because I'd been on the board for a few years and I'd understood the work that had been done, I could totally see the potential.
Okay.
And it is true, I think after I'd become CEO, that potential became even more evident.
Yeah.
And then, of course, a lot more people were like, but this could be a really incredible thing to do. So I think there is that. And your example is so pertinent in the context of Donald Trump's success, victory just yesterday. In the sense that, again, right, you had Kamala Harris taking over this campaign 4 months before Election Day. And again, it was a campaign that was not doing well. And with an absolute risk of the Democrats losing the presidency or losing the White House, which they ultimately did. But this was now the perfect opportunity to give it to a Black woman. And I think there is a lot of that. And I think it's called the glass ceiling. There's not the glass ceiling, it's the glass cliff.
Yes.
Right?
On the other side.
So you're going to elevate you into this role knowing full well that you're going to topple over and fall on your head. So I think those things still do happen.
Sure.
I think this is going to sound potentially defeating, but the opportunities for women to lead are just so few and far between. Particularly to lead at very, very senior levels and very high profile roles. It almost becomes important that we do it anyway, even when we appreciate that the risk of failure is going to be high. Because if we succeed, then that success is truly exceptional, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully is seen as such.
Yeah.
But even if we fail, that we were there, that we ventured out, that we gave it our best shot, still serves as an example to others who saw that and were like, okay, no, maybe the next one will succeed,
Yeah.
right? You create that momentum. And I think for me, even with Kamala Harris's defeat yesterday, there's no question that that woman gave it her all.
Absolutely.
You know, she fought the good fight.
Absolutely.
She created the narratives. She was there.
Yeah.
And I think the very fact that she was there
Yeah.
puts a little bit of a spring in any person's step who's ever been marginalized by society. I think all of us who needed it had that sense of, no. I mean, look, it didn't work out,
Yeah.
but the fight continues.
Yeah, but she was there.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I love that. I love you actually have to be in the ring.
That's it. In the arena. Exactly.
If you're not in the ring, there's no chance.
Yeah,
you know?
this is it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's like when I tell my daughter, oh yes, lotto, and I'm gonna win the lottery. Like, do you play?
I love it.
Like, you're not gonna win if you don't play.
Put some skin in the game, Mom.
But it's exactly that principle, right? That you actually have, get into the ring and take those opportunities and take those moments, and they're beautiful. So, okay, now let's talk about Basani in life and sort of enjoyment and, kind of, there you go in the corporate world, fighting the fight. What energizes you? Like, where do you find, what do you do to kind of keep it going? Okay, tomorrow's another day, or whatever it is. Like, what energizes you? What do you enjoy?
So for sure, the thing that on a day-to-day basis keeps me energized and hopeful is exercise. So
You still run?
I love to run. I discovered trail running when I moved to Cape Town a few years ago, which I really, really enjoy. I love it. I do races. It's been such a joy for me to start doing that, and it really keeps my energy levels up, right? And it kind of puts a smile on my face every day, which I think is lovely.
Yeah.
And I think over and above that, it's definitely family. Every opportunity that I have to bring my family together, to spend time with my family, to draw on their love and their energy is amazing. And then I've also been so lucky to have adopted family. All these friends that you pick up along the way, who choose to stay. And those are just, I derive so much joy from that. So I've been very lucky to have around a support circle around me that just brings me enormous joy.
Yeah. I mean, I remember you mentioning not so long ago that, reading some sort of a book club, and I'm quite curious to what are you reading now, and, what's on your shelf?
So much, too much. So at the moment, I've been kind of binging Nigerian authors. I don't know if you noticed. There's so many books that have been written by Nigerian authors in the last few years. It's like magic, right? To see yourself reflected in books matters so much. So representation matters, and I feel like I'm not Nigerian, it's true. But I think having that African culture represented back to me is beautiful, and I thoroughly enjoy them. But I've just started reading Nexus by Yuval Harari.
Okay.
So it's his first book in a very long time. So I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm jumping in. And it's amazing. But the other one, so two things happened in 2 consecutive weeks. So Yuval publishes, and Minta Nahasi published a book. I mean, are you joking? I'm going to have the best December. Like the best. And I also noted that Chimamanda Adichie
She's also,
published in March.
Awesome.
I'm in heaven. I could not be happier.
Yeah.
I mean,
And then often the expectation, also when I talk to people that I'm reading, that the expectation is that you're reading business books and something about, I read fiction.
I try to mix it up for sure. But I think so it's true. I mean, you must mix it up. I'm sure I've spoken to you about this as well in the past. Is this idea that reading novels actually helps you to understand people. Right. It gives you a broader array of how different people show up, and as a result, how you might want to show up.
Yeah.
Right. If you have a bigger sense of what is possible, then you can think very differently about who you are and what that means and what the trade-offs are, which I love for myself. But I think also I love it for the people I lead, because chances are I've encountered you in a novel. I kind of see what's happening here, and I can make sense of it, and I can try and work my way around it. So if reading novels develops your emotional quotient, right? Your EQ, and if it's also true that we live in a world now where people are expecting their leaders to show up with a lot more emotional intelligence than what was perhaps the case in the past. This is a very important muscle to develop. And I'm glad that I've had the privilege to love reading early enough in life that, I feel like I have over time been developing a reasonably good emotional intelligence, which enables me to lead better.
And when you're thinking about, kind of your future, road ahead, all of those things, kind of, what's in the future for you? What's in store? What are you looking to? Or
so now when I think about it, I think for a long time I was still very married to this idea of breaking glass ceilings. I think in the last 2 years, I've kind of mellowed a bit, right? I think I'm in a space more now of how do I make sure that I'm making a meaningful difference in the lives of the people around me, be it the people in my team, be it in my family and friends' lives, because, they're my favorite people. How do I just invest in that, right, in relationships? Because ultimately, that's really what matters. And I'm in a place now where I'm invested in being better at being, a better friend, a better sibling, and so on. So I've been thinking about that a lot. And then I think on the other side, I've also been thinking a lot about how to locate myself in the history of my ancestors. That's very vague. But I often think about where I come from. And the history that my parents, their parents, and so on have lived through, and what they have left us as our history, as our culture, and what they were trying to achieve. And to me, that's kind of says, okay, look, I was born and I've lived with my feet on the shoulders of these giants. What is going to be my contribution to this family narrative? And I'm loving being in that space right now. And just kind of being more intentional about my story, as opposed to kind of almost letting it happen because of other people's expectations.
Oh my gosh, that's it's touching something, because I've also just gone through call it a project, in where I've tried to kind of look back and even just trace my history, and I've gone back quite a number of sort of generations, and there's something, and I don't know if it's an age thing,
probably,
it's the next kind of period of my life is shorter, most likely, than where I am now or where I've come from now. But there's something about identity, origin, source, kind of where you come from, and what kind of shapes you. And I think there's something about us as, when I think about my own family, it wasn't, I didn't know my grandparents other than one who I met, for really but I remember my dad's dad, so my grandfather, who I'd never met, but every single birthday I used to get a thingy with an envelope, and in the envelope there used to be, on my birthday, some money and planting the wealth and greatness in my life. That used to be like every year. And I was like, I'm quite curious, to understand, that influence and identity. Say a little bit more about kind of what's made you think about, sort of the origins, and what have you discovered that has like sort of interested you, and you're like, oh wow, that's kind of me.
Well, it is a bit morbid. I think my father passing away
Yeah.
it's been 7 years now,
Yeah.
so one would think that's long enough to be over it.
Never ever long enough.
It's never long enough.
Yeah.
But I think, as I think more about him, and I think differently about him over time,
Yeah.
I'm honestly, on an ongoing basis, so much more grateful for the sacrifices that he made.
Oh, yeah.
Not just for me and for my family, but for so many other people, for the country.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
these men play such an important role in giving birth to this democracy.
Yeah.
And in many ways, they're like the unsung heroes of this thing.
Yeah.
So I'm actually in Joburg as well now for a funeral tomorrow.
Oh.
So my uncle passed on. And
That's
again, right, thank you. But he was 84 and he had dementia and he lived an incredible life. But again, so we were at the memorial service yesterday and people were recounting his life story, right? And so much of it, having lived in apartheid and it was so hard. And this man who was the first psychologist, the first psychologist in South Africa.
Yes.
The first black one, graduated cum laude,
Yeah.
has a PhD and so on, and how much he just struggled against a system that was just created to keep him, to hold him back and to limit his potential, and how hard he fought. And how many people's lives he touched and how many people he supported to actually achieve their dreams, the very dreams that he was not able to achieve. And I think as I think about what people bequeathed, right? These gifts that these men who are in my life, and indeed all these women who are in my life, and I think about how much they gave up.
Yeah.
I think about how lucky I am to even be able to have the opportunity to look back on it and to think about how I want to shape my own life.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a privilege, right? It's a privilege born out of the sacrifices that were made by all these people who came before me. And I'm like, actually, if I had to, I want to make them proud. I mean, it sounds like a rather childish thing. But I want to make sure that the life that I live, they can look back, I don't know where they are.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And be like, no, we did well there with that one.
She can say.
Right? That wasn't a complete waste of time. That was a good investment.
Yeah.
That was a good investment. So I think that's it for me. It's just looking back and just thinking about what it took to create the opportunities that I've had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you think about just your own legacy and, one of the questions I know that are cheesy, but I always find interesting is what would you say to a younger self, right? 16-year-old Basani, 21-year-old Basani entering the grown-up world.
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you share?
She wouldn't have listened. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's the thing.
She wouldn't be able to
Advice
hear
with
it.
that.
She wouldn't have been able to hear it or comprehend it. I suppose then maybe that if that is true, that I would not have understood it. Is just live your own life.
Yeah.
It's all gonna be okay. Like don't sweat every failure, right? Learn to forgive yourself earlier, more quickly. Forgive yourself more quickly for the mistakes.
Yeah.
Celebrate the successes a bit more. Really enjoy them, lean into them.
Yeah.
Learn to love yourself a lot earlier. I think it took me a long time. And just believe it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Just believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't always sure.
Yeah. Sometimes one is like, oh, still.
And I suppose one of the other thoughts I've been having a lot over the course of the last year or so is that movie, Benjamin Button. I now know why they made it. Everything is very different when you're in your 40s.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Youth is wasted on the young. And I guess I'm reflecting on that a lot more.
Yeah.
And to your point, also looking back with a bit of nostalgia at the past and trying to figure out how to move forward with grace and kindness for myself.
Sure. Wow. Awesome. I mean, I could chat to you the whole day. We do sometimes.
Indeed, over a glass of wine.
Over a glass of wine, always. But oh my gosh, it's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, I could keep you here forever, but
I've enjoyed this time.
It's
Thank
been
you.
so great. I think we need a part 2, guys.
Finish the story.
Yeah, like digging deep into some of the stuff. But I've definitely learned a lot. I mean, we've chatted many a times, but just being in this conversation, things I didn't know, and all of that. But I've learned a lot, and I'm sure people out there have learned a lot as well. And just an inside look into you.
But thank you so much for the opportunity. I think it's not a thing I get to do often, to really just think back and have a bit of gratitude for where I am. So thanks for the opportunity. Thank you for your probing questions and for your generosity always.
Yeah.
So, thanks.
Oh, I love it. Thank you.
You've been listening to Nabantu Connect. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube for more.